Hello everyone, Mr. Sinister here with a couple of announcements and updates. I wanted first off to apologise to you all for my lack of content over these past few months. The reason for my absence is because I acquired my very first audiobook contract, which, although being a short novel, has taken a lot of my time to complete in time for the deadline. The good news is this has not only been a great opportunity for me to branch out into other platforms, but has also really pushed my narrating and editing abilities. So yes, I am sorry for not producing any new content for you at this time, but I can assure you it is on the way, along with some more information regarding my forthcoming audiobook. In the meantime, please enjoy some of my favourite stories from my older videos in this compilation. Story 1.
This happened years ago. I'm not exactly sure how many years, but I know it's been at least 3. By now, I've probably altered the memory by accident, but I'll tell you what I can remember. For as long as I can remember, I've had issues with insomnia. I'm also spooked extremely easily, and as a kid, if I watched a scary movie or heard anything that scared me, I would force myself to stay up until 6 a.m., even on 2 doses of melatonin. To make this even harder, to this day I have extremely vivid dreams that I remember easily. I also have a slew of mental issues and a family history of schizophrenia. This is all necessary, I'm not just complaining. I don't know if I saw, hallucinated, or dreamt that this happened, because I'm fairly certain I didn't dream it, because I didn't sleep the rest of the night afterwards. It was around midnight and I was having another sleepless night, no surprise. Now this is what I'm recalling years later, so it may be inaccurate or vague. I looked to my side, into my closet, to see a tall, lanky man in a camouflage army uniform, his hat pulled down over his eyes. He looked like he was made of cobwebs, and I had old drawings of him in some sketchbooks. I rubbed my eyes, expecting him to go away, but he didn't. He was still there, and he was very, very slowly walking towards me. Being the skittish preteen I was, without a second thought, I rushed over to my nightlight and flicked it on. He vanished. As I thought it over later, I realized there was nothing menacing about him. I never sensed any ill intention, though I don't know if a gut feeling works the same way with ghosts. I regretted my decision and started calling him Max. I hoped he would return. He never did.
Story 2.
Last night I woke up to a shattering sound only to find out that I could not move. I've had sleep paralysis twice before and it's already scary enough not to be able to move when you wake up. Now, this particular time I woke up facing my window, to which I started freaking out because it was open and I could see outside. As I started panicking and trying to move, I could see movement outside my window. I tried yelling to wake up my parents in the room across from mine, but I could only make a faint sound. As the movement kept going on, I started to sweat, which was really annoying because it was rolling down my face, but I couldn't wipe it off. I started to feel constricted and the movement outside my window stopped. I convinced myself it was just the wind blowing a tree branch around. I realized there was nothing I could do, so I did my best to fall back to sleep. This morning I woke up to find a glass I drank out of last night was shattered, and my door cracked open.
Story 3.
Back in August 2013, I was on holiday in Scotland with my partner and our son and my mum and dad. We had rented out a house in a little village. One night, we were just chilling out at the house. My dad had gone down to the harbour to phone his mum. There wasn't a very good reception in the house and I was in the kitchen making a drink. The rest of the family was in the lounge area. It was all open plan so I could see them. I was just standing there mixing my drink when all of a sudden, I heard a Scottish woman's voice whisper in my ear, "You're going to die." It really freaked me out and made me look around, but of course there was nobody there, and I just kind of shrugged it off. A couple of minutes later, my dad came back in looking a bit flustered. He said he'd just been standing down by the harbour after finishing his phone call when he felt something tug his coat so hard it made him stumble. He thought somebody was about to attack him, so he looked around, but there was nobody there. I never told anybody about what I heard, as I didn't want to put a dampener on the rest of the holiday. But I wonder if the two incidences were connected. They both happened around the same time.
Story 4.
This happened when I was still in high school, about 8 years ago, and I was sleeping over at my friend's house. Mind you, this was almost ritualistic to me at this point, seeing as my best friend at the time and I had been having sleepovers at her house almost every single weekend. So what happened that night was not because I was in a strange environment or because I was uncomfortable and edgy. Anyways, we were having our typical teenage girl sleepover, ransacking all the snacks in the pantry, watching terrible scary movies until 2 a.m, etc. Horror movies were all that we ever watched, so don't try to say it was because I was spooked. It was the norm for us. My friend has a double-sized bed, so it was pretty cramped to sleep in together, but we made it work. Anyways, I have to explain the layout of this room for a second so you will understand that it couldn't have been anyone or anything in or out of the room when this happened. My friend was laying right by the wall. I was the one who was closest to the TV, which was off, the laptop and radio, which were both off as well, and nothing in the room was on other than my charging cell phone. No one in the house was up at the time, and we were the only ones in the room. Well, my friend had been asleep for about half an hour, give or take, and I had just started to fall asleep myself. My eyes were closed, and I was just on the edge of being fully asleep when someone right next to me, not my friend, because this was on the side of the bed closest to the door, she was on the opposite side, began to talk. It seriously sounded like someone was leaning down and talking right into my ear. Not quietly, not loudly, just normal conversational tone. But here is the thing. I could not understand a single thing she was saying. It was a female voice, but it was straight gibberish. I didn't recognize any particular language, accent, or anything. It was just garbled noises. As soon as it started, I completely froze, my eyes snapping open in the dark. The talking lasted for a good 10 to 15 seconds as it pulled me out of my sleep. My first reaction was to calm down and that maybe I was dreaming or something. But what stopped my heart right there and then was my friend, who I may remind you has been asleep for quite a while at this point, suddenly sat up in the bed next to me, rubbing her eyes and saying sleepily, "Did you hear a girl talking just now?" Laid back down and fell right back asleep. Can I just say that I was left utterly speechless and couldn't sleep for so long that I ended up getting up hours later and just going home out of sheer terror. See, it wasn't that the voice felt threatening. It really did sound like some random girl trying to have a pleasant conversation, but I never had an experience like that before, or ever since. And to this day, I cannot explain why or how it happened.
Story 5.
Right. When I was around 8 years old, I lived in a 2-bedroom attached house in the east of England. My sister was 9 at the time, and we shared a bedroom. This is where the shit went down. My sister and me had collected an abundance of tat and shitty toys throughout the years, which just festered in the room. One toy we owned was a purple Polly Pocket. Look them up if you don't remember them. It was a big purple heart, and when flipped open you had to spin a little white lady, and it'd play a creepy loud version of Here Comes the Bride. Anyhow, I'd always been a bit of a weird child. My bedroom and bathroom door would always swing open just as I'd get close enough to going in, and I'd say, "Thank you," and laugh. Absolutely oblivious to the fact that this was creepy as hell. I'd also see a dark figure out of the corner of my eye walking past my brother's little box room, but thought nothing of it. It was around 10 to 11 p.m. on a school holidays, and I'd thought I'd rock the boat by staying up after hours. Where I laid in the top bunk, I was able to see the whole room and out of the window perfectly to the street below. I hadn't yet fallen asleep, but was startled to open my eyes when I heard that wedding song from the Polly Pocket blasting off. I can just remember "Here Comes the Bride" playing eerily and loudly. I looked up towards the window, and standing around 4 to 5 feet away from my face was a dark figure. The room was dark, but this thing was black as black can be. I was laying there staring at this black, faceless man for what felt like ages. I whispered my sister's name and heard the usual grunt of reassurance from the bottom bunk. I looked back up to this black figure man, and it started to fade in front of my eyes. I'd have been okay, but the Polly Pocket had to have been physically opened, the little lady spun, and the tune would blast out. It had never played unassisted before. The next day, me and my best friend were chilling in my room eating some chips or some shit. I told her about what had happened the night before, how I was freaked out. Her face started to turn pale, and I shit you not, that fucking "Here Comes the Bride" tune blasted out from the Polly Pocket. All too conveniently. It had never played before without touching it, and never has after. 15 years on, and my still best mate stains her pants when we talk about what happened. Maybe unrelated, maybe not. Only a week or so after the whole Polly Pocket fiasco, I was sat upright in my bunk bed, looking at the street below. My stomach literally dropped. I saw, walking along the street in a weird, stuttering motion, a man who was wearing a top hat and a penguin-style suit. Obviously could have been a real man, but no, because this motherfucker was slightly transparent. It may sound stupid, but it's 100% true, and I can never own or let my future kids own a Polly Pocket. Maybe there's some connection between the "Here Comes the Bride" tune and seeing the penguin suit-topped hat man. Who knows? Who cares?
Story 6.
I've had several experiences in my life, which I don't talk about out of fear of ridicule. I believe that I encountered something. Some background about myself. I grew up in a rural area near a cemetery. In fact, the cemetery was next door to us. It wasn't unusual for me to look out and see funerals and graves from my bedroom window. We always had minor disturbances in the house, objects disappearing and reappearing, stuff like that. I just shrugged it off. I moved when I got older. I went to school and met a girl. I thought my life was coming together after a turbulent childhood and early adulthood. I scored this one-bedroom flat on the outskirts of the capital city in my province. It was for a really good price. Everything included for $600 a month, which is a steal of a deal considering that all the other units in the building were $15,000, and just slightly bigger than my own. Right after we moved in, we noticed things. There was this random smell that would appear, then dissipate. It was a rotten egg smell. We never did figure out where it came from, and it was always cold in that unit. It would be 30 plus degrees Celsius outside, and it would feel like you were sitting in a meat locker inside. As well as this, we both kept seeing a shadow out of the corner of our eyes. We'd turn our heads, and it would be gone. I had issues with things like my bus pass and house keys vanishing, then reappearing in strange places like the freezer. I also found the stove on one day with all 4 burners lit. And another time, all the lights were turned on in the house with every faucet going full blast. At the time, I blamed my ex, which looking back, I should have listened to her and moved out sooner. My relationship with the girl soured and disintegrated. We don't even speak now. All we would do is fight over trivial shit. It was around this time that I noticed that other couples in the building were also fighting. I found that I had a radical change in my personality. I was always angry. I never knew why either, and I began drinking to excess. I used to only drink once in a while. I also began to have horrific nightmares there, involving being in a fight and something telling me to kill myself, and rhymed off all the failures I had in life. It was to the point I couldn't sleep or think straight. Eventually, I had enough and decided to move after everything had happened and an incident with one of the neighbours. Most of it I can recall are images and sounds. It was like everything was disjointed. I thought I was going insane in that apartment. I actually took myself to the emergency room and tried to have myself put under observation. After a few hours of being out of the apartment, I felt fine. I even spent time with my family, and I was okay. I moved out of there to my current place where I live, and everything is great now. I talked to the caretaker during my out inspection, and he told me about several other people that had lived there before me and how they usually moved out after 6 months. I wasn't the first tenant to tell him there was something wrong with the unit. Supposedly, 80-some years ago, it is rumoured that a man murdered his wife and kids there on the property before hanging himself. To be honest, I'm glad that I got the hell out of there, though I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Did this really happen? If so, what was that? I don't plan on returning to find out.
Story 7.
Ever since I was a kid, things happened that no one else saw or heard. Imagination seemed to be their favourite word whenever fear or curiosity would flush over me. Around 5th grade, I remember telling my mother about the voices I had recently began to hear. Not very many words, mostly whispers that I couldn't quite understand. Don't ever talk about that or anything like it again. They'll have you taken away for being crazy. This was the starting point of isolation. Over the years, things seemed to only get worse. 7th grade is when sleep paralysis began, but I wouldn't learn about that until the 9th grade. I do remember one night, particularly of the 9th grade year, I woke up to what I thought was another sleep paralysis, but something was off. I could move. I started to hear this loud buzzing noise. Nothing new. I've always heard this even during the day. But why was it getting louder? Soon my body started to vibrate and it felt like someone was trying to pry my skull open from the top of my head. A fast stream of flashing colours began to fill my eyes until everything went completely dark. I was panicking. Why wasn't my dog, who barks at literally a pen drop, not losing her mind? Doesn't she feel the house shaking? Does she hear me screaming? I saw this shadow man appear. It was odd to see something darker than black so clearly. Sure, I was a little scared, but I've seen these since childhood. It was what I saw after it vanished that scares me whenever I think about it. It was a massive being of shadows that seemed to move like water. It had skin like crisp tree bark that seemed to just set on its barely humanoid body. I remember all the lights and colours I saw seemingly rushed back into my open skull within a second, followed by a pressure I can only describe as breathtaking. My entire body went numb, and I passed out. That was 4 years ago. Ever since then, if I start to feel that pressure, I know it's around, and that it's ready for another of the many long nights.
Story 8.
I would like to share here with you a story from my childhood that gives me the chills to this day whenever I think about it. The Man with the Hat. The year was 2004. I was 11 years old back then. It was a regular night. I was sleeping in my room and my parents were sleeping in the next one. In the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up. I needed to go to the bathroom and the bed was so comfortable and I was so sleepy that I ended up lying down with my eyes open for a while, and I was waiting for a motivational kick to finally get up. Then, for a brief moment, I caught a movement with my eyes. It was like something moved in the room. I was half asleep, so I quickly comforted myself that it was probably a shadow of something that moved outside the window. And how I wish it was. Just a few seconds later, I saw a tall man wearing a hat standing in the corner of my room. He was glowing in light blue color that resembled an aura. It was covering his entire body. I was so afraid that it paralyzed me and I could barely move. I simply turned my head to the right side facing my room's door and screamed to alert my parents. I was struggling to breathe, so the scream wasn't powerful enough. The man slowly approached my bed. He kneeled down and put his hands together like someone who was about to pray. I couldn't see his face. He was just a glowing silhouette of a human shape. I was almost losing my mind at that point. I covered my face with my hands, and then suddenly I saw a yellow light shining through my fingers. It was morning, and everything was back to normal. It just felt like a sudden time skip. I was still shaking and all sweaty. I was absolutely sure it wasn't a dream. I was scared so much after that night that I slept the next 2 weeks with my parents and developed a fear of the dark. Adding to the creepiness, after my parents had divorced 2 years later, and we moved with my mum to the other city, she told me that the previous owner of our previous flat hanged himself in my room. I have confirmed this information myself later in some investigation, so she wasn't joking. My parents knew this guy because my mother was friends with his wife. She never told me about that incident earlier because she didn't want to scare me. She knew I wouldn't be able to sleep in that room if I knew. Years passed and I finally decided to tell my mother about my experience. Earlier, I was afraid that she would only laugh at me. But now I'm a grown-up, I thought she would take it more seriously. She listened carefully and opened her eyes wide when I described the man's appearance. When I asked her why she seemed so scared, she replied telling me that the man who hanged himself there was indeed very tall, around 2 meters, and he was always wearing his favorite hat whenever he was going out somewhere. Her description fitted perfectly what I saw that night. Chills went down my spine once again.
Story 9.
A few years ago, I was living in an apartment with my infant son and now ex-wife. The house that the apartment was in was around 100 years old, and we were living in the bottom floor, which had been renovated. The first things we started to notice were my son's toys going off at random. This is pretty easy to explain away or blow off, but it was so frequent that me and my ex would joke about there being some kind of ghost. The creepiest was one night, while up late, I walked near a little stuffed animal that would make sound and light up when you pushed its belly. Right after passing it, I saw the lights and heard, "Bye-bye," which startled me a bit, but whatever, it's just a toy. Probably low batteries or something. Laying in bed talking one morning while it was still dark, I said we should get up and turn on the lights and get ready for the day. Boom. Every light in the room goes on at the exact same time. My ex looked at me with huge eyes and we both just started laughing. It was so strange, and we both experienced it. I once woke up to use the toilet. 2 or 3 in the morning if I remember. When I get to the door, it's locked from the inside, and I can hear the water running. I go from groggy to full awake, and quickly walk back to my bedroom to tell my ex to come and check this out. We can see the bathroom from our bedroom door. Both of us hear the water turn off, hear the door unlock, and see the light turn on. You can see the light under the door. I go and check the door, with her right behind me because fuck doing that alone. It is unlocked. The light stays on, and there are clearly drops of water still in the sink. I make her wait by the door as I did my business, full on spooked. The thing was, nothing was damaged ever. No one was directly bothered, and I guess I would say I felt a warm and cozy presence there, as cheesy as that sounds. Aside from the strangeness of things happening that I couldn't just explain away, I had no uneasy feelings at all while being alone or up late at night. I'm a pretty skeptical person, not religious, and I've never dabbled with Ouija or anything, just not my thing. Reading spooky subreddits is as far as I generally delve into the supernatural, so this really stood out for me. Just thought I would share my experiences. Most of the stuff I've read seems to be pretty grim.
Story 10.
When I was 7, my parents bought their first house. Up until then, we rented. We were all pretty excited. It was your average 2-story American house in the most normal neighborhood, 2 blocks away from my elementary school. My dad brought me a dog, a little Welsh Terrier. About 4 months after we moved in, weird things started to happen. My mum refused to believe the odd things couldn't be explained. It started with weird noises in our basement. We'd be sitting in our living room and hearing a clanking in our basement. The second you walked down the stairs, it would stop. You'd go back up, and it would start again. My mum said it must be plumbing. One night I was lying in bed. My parents had gone to sleep. All of a sudden, there was a screeching noise in the kitchen downstairs. I started shaking and pulled the covers up over me. Then the scratching came at my door. I yelled for my mum as loud as I could, and she yelled back down the hall. I heard it too. It's just the dog. What she didn't know was that my dog was asleep next to me in my bed. Amid my shaking, I must have fallen asleep. The next morning there were obvious scratch marks, like my dog had in fact scratched up my door. The next big thing that happened was when I was 9. I had the day off school and my mum was at work. My dad was home with me. He had to run down the street to our neighbours to get something and left me at home for maybe half an hour. I was reading a book upstairs in my room with my dog hanging out with me. Next to my room was the guest room. All of a sudden, my dog stood up and started barking at the wall separating my room from the guest room. The bed frame started knocking against the wall. I thought the window must be open and pushing something against it. I walked to the guest room with my dog following and opened the door to the guest room. The window was closed and the bed frame wasn't even touching the wall. I freaked out and ran down the street to my neighbours. Plenty of other things happened at my house too, and my mum and I moved out when I was 13 after my parents divorced. I don't miss that house, but sometimes it freaks me out to think about it all.
Story 11.
Before I talk about what happened, here's some backstory. So the previous owner of my house was really into bodybuilding. He was pretty short, and I think he was trying to overcompensate for that. He turned the garage into a weights room, and after living in the house for 6 years, he dropped a 350-pound barbell on his head and died. Because of the history of the house, I got a much better price, and being a skeptic, I was not concerned. After living here for the past few months, I have noticed a handful of strange occurrences. Sometimes I hear the sound of metal clanking coming from the garage. Sometimes I also hear strange grunts and loud breathing noises in the house as well. If it is a spirit, I feel like he is trying to intimidate me. Since I live alone, it's pretty weird. In addition, sometimes I find weights on the floor instead of on the rack, even though I didn't put them there. Today in the gym, I saw what looked like a man's reflection in the mirror. There was no one in the house at the time, so I'm a little bit concerned.
Story 12.
I can't rightly remember how old I was when this happened. Not that it really matters in this case. All that matters is that this happened and this was my first real paranormal experience. It was a weekend. I was enjoying my time away from school, watching TV and playing my favourite game, Majora's Mask on the N64. It had been snowing all day and most of the evening. The Weather Channel had predicted that it would be snowing all through the night. This, of course, suited my father and me just fine. We absolutely loved the snow, and I was hoping that it would come down enough for school to be cancelled. It was right around 10:30 when I joined my parents in the living room. I sat on the couch and began watching some stand-up comedian on TV. About 20 minutes had gone by when, from out of nowhere, I heard 3 very loud knocks on our front door. I looked at my parents, who were just as confused as I was. Who on earth would be knocking on our door this late at night in the middle of what was, at this point, practically a blizzard? I looked out the window but could not see anything through the frenzy of snow flurries. My dad and I got up to answer the door. For a moment, I was beginning to think it was some poor person that must have slid off the road or had stalled. That would have been a normal thing. But that night turned out to be anything but normal. My dad unlocked the door and opened it. Snow flurries began to fly into the house as we turned on the porch light to see who was there. Nothing. No one. There was no one there. Both my dad and I looked around outside but could not see or hear anyone or anything. I thought maybe it was my friend from just down the street playing some kind of prank. But at that moment, I considered that my theory was immediately proven wrong. I looked down and saw fresh powder. No footprints. None. The snow on the ground was completely untouched. We tried to come up with a rational explanation for what had just happened. All 3 of us heard it, and it was the sound of someone knocking on the door. But there was never anyone there. At least, not physically.